once again. Na yɛbɛtoa so no, wohwɛ right hand corner hɔ nom, the word subscribe wɔ hɔ nom, mmea so na subscribe ɛyɛ free, wontua hwee, subscribe for free. Today we bring to you another fantastic topic that is for the promotion course that we are on, and it's very interesting. We look at it, or we look at this area before we go and write our promotion exams. Subscribe and like and share. To our topic, we would like to share another. Yes, before we go and write our promotion exams, it is very important. My network is just misbehaving. Very important. My network is just misbehaving, but yes, we'll look at another important area before we look at the main discussion of the day. We're looking at test scores interpretation or test performance interpretation. We have two categories of test interpretation. After a test has been conducted and results has come out or scores has been made, there are two interpretations that are given to a test, and we are going to look at this interpretation before we go through our main topic today. So one of the interpretation that is given to a test scores or performance is non-reference interpretation. Non-reference interpretation. That is one of the interpretation that we give to a test performance or a test score, and it's very important that we look at it before we go and write our promotion exams. So what is a non reference interpretation of a test? So it describes the scores or the test scores or performance in terms of the students positioned in the reference group, or it describes the student's performance against the group in which the student write the exams with. So when we talk about non-reference test interpretation, it describes the scores or performance in terms of the student's position in the reference group that has been administered as the assignment or the test. So in other words, when we are talking about the non-reference tests, it compares the student's performance with other groups who have taken the test. So if you are comparing the group of the test scores or the test performance of students or one student against the entire group, then that is a non-reference test. That is a non-reference test. Then we'll look at the importance of a non-reference test. Is it important at all? Yes, it is very important that we do a non-reference test interpretation. And one of the benefits of the non-reference test interpretation is that it helps in selection decision. It helps in selection decision. So in selecting students for award or prizes, a non-reference test approach is one of the best ways that we can use to select students for an award. So it is very important. Then two, for comparison decisions, if you want to compare um, the student's performance, it is very important that you use a non-reference test to compare students and know their performance. That is one of the importance of the non-reference test. Then for achievement tests, another important of the non-reference test is to make decision on achievement tests. So examination bodies like WAEC use it to sometimes interpret the results of the students in the BEC or the WASI. So it is very important. Then for monitoring decisions, if you want to monitor the student's performance, it is the best to use a non-reference test to monitor the performance of the student. So it is useful in monitoring the general progress of the students. That is one of the most important of a non-reference test. Then let's look at the second interpretation of a student test score or a student performance. This one is criterion-referenced interpretation. Criterion-referenced test interpretation. It describes the test score or the performance in terms of the kind of task a person with a given score can do. So if you want to know what a person can do, then the correct test interpretation to use here is a criterion reference test. That's the most best way to test what a student can do at the end of the whole test process that you have taken the learners through. So it's very important that we know all these things. So when we are talking about a criterion reference interpretation, this one, the performance is compared to the predetermined standard or criteria that is set for the test interpretation. So it is very important. So the criterion reference test measures or compares the students against the standard laid instructions that have been given or the pre-established standard or criterion that has been given. So if the students are able to match the predetermined instructions or standard that are given, then this is a criterion reference test interpretation. Then let's look at, is this having importance at all? Yes, it is having importance, or its usefulness is very important. One of the uses of the criterion reference test is for certification decision. If you want to give certificates, or if you want to help your learners in several areas of work to demonstrate the skills and the acquisition of knowledge, then you need a criterion reference test interpretation to know that the student has acquired a skills and knowledge, and that can help the students to work in a particular work field. So it provides information about whether an applicant has a required level of skills or not. That is a non-reference test the criterion reference test interpretation. Then two, or the second importance of the criterion reference test is that it helps you to test the minimum competency of the student or the learner. So reference scores are used to determine whether a student or a class can move on to the higher level or not. So it's very important that we get to know the criterion reference test and its importance before we go and write the promotion exams. It is very important. Then another important or another uses of the criterion reference test interpretation is for diagnostic decision. If you want to diagnose and see that the learner has acquired a certain skills, then you need, or if there is a weakness or there is a challenge in the subject area, then you need a criterion reference test interpretation. So it tells the teacher to discover the learning difficulties of people, and also for teachers to know which topic they have not um, taught, or they have not made any progress in the learning environment. It is very important. Then another important use of the criterion reference test is for placement decision. Placement decision. It provides information as to whether a student can succeed in a program or not. If the student can be a medical doctor or cannot be a medical doctor, it depends on the criterion reference test, because you are measuring this or you're interpreting this test score or performance of the learner against the pre-established standard that the child needs to meet. So it is very important for placement decisions or placement reason that we make a test score or performance interpretation very important, or criterion reference interpretation. Then the last uses or the last usefulness of the criterion reference test is for program evaluation. If you want to evaluate the whole program and see that the program has worked well, then you need not to use a non reference interpretation, but rather a criterion reference interpretation is needed. It is very important that we learned this. So criterion reference score provide information about a national progress in education. The performance of the students can be indicated whether a particular curriculum is successful in its implementation or not. So it is very important that we use a criterion reference test interpretation in interpreting any assessment or any test scores that we come out, to see whether the program that we have implemented is actually successful or not. So it's very important that we look at all these things before we go and write our promotion exams. So we shouldn't take it lightly at all, but we should rather go through these areas before we go and write our promotion exam. It's very important. Then let's jump into the most important thing that we need to know before we go and write our promotion exams. That is the today's topic. That is the category of purposes of assessment. Categories of purposes of assessment. Very, very important. Most people struggle in this area, and we must get to know this area before we go and write our promotion exams. So one of the categories, we have three categories of purposes of assessment. One is assessment of learning. What is assessment of learning? We need to know, and we need to learn before we go and write our promotion exams. So assessment of learning, it occurs at the end of the year, or a key stages that we do assessment of learning. It is a summative assessment. It is summative assessment. Assessment of learning is summative. Summative in the sense that it is done at the end of the program, or at the end of the term, or at the end of the course, that brings all the formative and other tests into play. So assessment of learning is summative. Summative in the sense that it is done at the end of the course, at the end of the term, at the end of the semester. This is assessment of learning. So when we are saying assessment of learning, it is summative. It is often associated with letter grade or numbers for grading and reporting or preparing report cards or preparing for a transcript is very important, and certificate is very important. So it is a type of assessment that typically comes out at the end of the course to determine the extent to which an instructional goals have been achieved for grading and certification of students' achievement. So assessment of learning, it is done at the end of the term or at the end of the course, at the end of the semester, at the end of the whole program. So it is very important we know this category before we go and write our promotion exams. Then the second one is assessment as learning. Assessment as learning is a situation where students learned about themselves as learners and become aware of how they learn. This is where students assess themselves and be aware of how they learn. So as students begin to assess their own performance and know how they learn, this is assessment as learning. Assessment as learning is very important. So it involves self and peers assessment. So they examine themselves and know their capacities and know their abilities, and where they are falling short, they will learn to improve upon it. So it provides students with the opportunity to use the feedback to improve. So anything that they are learning or they are going through in the classroom, they assess themselves and see whether they are performing well or they are not performing well. If they are not performing well, they will sit up and improve upon their learning. So assessment as learning is a peers assessment or self-assessment by the student himself or herself. So they assess themselves. That is assessment of learning. Then we look at the last category of the purposes of assessment. The last category is assessment for learning. Assessment for learning. It is very important. This is an so we can also say that assessment challenges in the classroom while instructional activities are going on. So we say that it is ongoing, diagnostic, and formative. Formative in the sense that it is done in the process of teaching. So assessment for learning is formative and diagnostic. You are able to diagnose and see the learner strengths and the learner challenges in the classroom. Then you see how far the learner is progressing. If the learner is progressing, it is very important. The learner is progressing, it is very important that you use this category of assessment to assess the learner. It is very important. It is for ongoing planning and is not used for grading. It is not used for grading. We don't use assessment for learning as a grading system, but we rather use assessment of learning for grading and certification. Assessment for learning is done by the teacher in collaboration with the learner, and the feedback that the teacher gets or the learner gets help them improve the learning of the learner. So these are the most important things that we need to know before we go and write our promotion exams. If you find this tutorial very interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe, and continue to come back for another important thing once again, and we shall meet another time. Kindly subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Leave your comments behind, and bye bye.